Okay, so this is just a little mini lecture about Ostwald ripening and the Kelvin equation. So you found out by now that smaller particles have got greater solubility, and hopefully you can do the math using that equation to calculate what that change in solubility is. But what you're probably wondering, or you might be wondering, is how does that lead to particle growth? So sure, the small particles have got greater solubility, so they dissolve, but the big particles are still there. The small particles have got smaller, so in fact, if that's all that happens, then overall there's been a decrease in particle size, not particle growth. So the trick is that we've got to start thinking about temperature. So we have our suspension on storage, and sure, the smaller particles got greater solubility, so they start to dissolve, or they do dissolve more than what the big particles do. But then during the course of the day or overnight, the temperature changes a little bit. Even in a temperature controlled room or even in a fridge, there are small temperature fluctuations. So once the solvent is saturated with dissolved material, and then there's a temperature fluctuation. If the temperature increases slightly, that increases the solubility, and so therefore there'll be more material dissolved. If the temperature decreased, then there'd be a decrease in solubility, and all of a sudden the solution or the solvent would be supersaturated with dissolved material. Now in this case we've got a suspension there, so we've got lots of nucleation sites. So that supersaturated material can precipitate out onto the particles. Now it precipitates out equally onto all of the particles, but it was the smaller ones that dissolve more, so they don't grow back to their original size. They end up being slightly smaller. The big guys didn't dissolve very much to start with, and yet they got a coating on them, so in fact they have grown. So the small particles get smaller, the larger particles get slightly bigger. Then there's another temperature fluctuation. If the temperature goes up, then you get more dissolution. If the temperature goes down, then you get precipitation. Every time the temperature even very slightly increases, then the particles dissolve so that the solvent remains saturated at that new higher temperature, but the smaller particles dissolve more. When the temperature fluctuates, goes down so that it's now colder, then the material, the dissolved material, precipitates and precipitates on everything. But as I said, the larger particles didn't dissolve very much to start with, but they get a coating on them as well, so they're actually growing. And this continues on and on and on every time there's a temperature fluctuation. And that temperature fluctuation could be 1/10 of a degree, could be half a degree. It doesn't matter, it's very small, but that will be continuously happening over the storage time for that suspension. So in the end, the smaller particles are getting smaller and the larger particles getting bigger, which means overall there's an increase in particle size. And as it says on the slide there, that will continue endlessly. And so it's this difference in solubility between different sized particles and temperature fluctuations that results in smaller particles disappearing and the larger particles, they're larger to start with, and they keep getting bigger. So overall, we're getting larger particles in our suspension than what we started with. Okay, I hope this helps.